So last week we wrapped up our series on Why Church, which means we get to start a new series today. And today we're going to start a series called Oh Come Let Us Adore Him, HYMN. And what we're going to do today and through Advent is take a look at some of our favorite hymns, particularly as we go through Advent Christmas hymns. And we're going to unpack them and see what comes out of these things. Because, as I'm sure you know, hymns were not written just because someone said, oh, I think I'll just throw some words down on paper and try to crank out a Billboard top 10 hit. But each of these hymns that we sing is laid out to communicate our faith, to communicate something about God, something about Christ. And it's actually something my dad said to me about a year ago. He said, that's why I love a lot of these old hymns, is because a lot of these old hymns are sermons in and of themselves, if we pay attention. And so I thought today what we would do is, because we're just coming off Thanksgiving, we would take a look at a hymn that really centers around this notion of thanks. And so I chose For the Beauty of the Earth, which is why we just sang. And if you look at this, I mean, this hymn really goes through it. It's the refrain, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise, our hymn of thanks, praising you for all that has been created. Because if you look at the verses, it goes through and literally hits just about every single thing in creation and gives thanks to God for it. The earth, the skies, love, hill and vale, tree and fat flower, sun and moon, stars of light, ear and eye, heart and mind's delight, human love, brother, sister, parent, child, the church, for thyself as a gift divine to the world so freely given. Just thank you for being God. Thank you for coming to walk amongst us. So it's this sense that we thank God not just for a few things, but we thank God for all things. And I thought maybe the best way to tackle this from a scriptural perspective might be to go back and take just a look at the notion of creation itself. And so we just kind of pick those last verses to sort of wrap up that first creation account. And we see that it goes through and talks about the creations of the world. And what does God say at the end of each day? God created it and it was good. A good creation. A complete creation. And on the seventh day, God did what? Now, I thought about that a lot this week, because here's something that's interesting. When you think about resting on a Sunday or a Saturday or whatever your day of rest is, what do you think about? What do you do to rest? Sleep? Recliner? Football game? Right? And we do it because if we've worked a full week, we're tired. We're pooped. We're ready to just chill out and let everything go and recharge our batteries. And then I got to thinking about this. Does God need to recharge God's batteries? Does God ever get tired? I mean, if we're talking about an all-powerful God, we're talking about a God that puts the Energizer Bunny to shame. And so I thought, well, this idea then that God was kind of kicking back in the lounger with a glass of iced tea doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, at least not to me. And I thought that maybe this is a day where God simply appreciated all that God had done. That there was a satisfaction with the creation of the universe. And God took a day to just rest in that job well done. And appreciate what had been laid out. Because when you think about it, this world is really laid out in a pretty intricate fashion. I mean, the more science discovers, the more we realize how fine everything is put together. And that it's not this random kind of we're not just random blobs of flesh that sort of wander around the earth, but our bodies are amazing things. And everything from just a simple seedling is an amazing creation and works together in a very particular way. Now, we're going to take a little bit of a trip back because I think it's important to do this today. But about a year ago, preached a sermon on does God bring disaster and calamity as punishment on individuals? And here's why I think it's worth going back and revisiting, just for a moment. Because when we say creation is good, and we say creation is complete, then the question comes up, well, then why are there hurricanes and floods and tornadoes, and why does all this crazy stuff happen, and why is there sickness? Why is there war? Why is there strife? Why is there poverty? And just a quick comment is poverty, war, and strife typically is not something that God created. That's something that we do. So we can bring evil into a good creation. But the other piece to it is this notion of how the world functions. And I want to direct you, again, if you've never read Adam Hamilton's book, Why, you need to give it a read. Because he puts language to something that I think is very accurate. I'll summarize it here just to bring us back to that sermon a while ago. But it's this notion that natural disaster is not a cosmic whammy because somebody tripped up. But rather, it might be more possible that God created this universe as a self-sustaining entity. That the world functions in a way that it's set up to preserve life. I mean, we hear all these things many times that people put out there about how there has to be a designer, a creator behind all of this, because life is in this perfect balance that if just one little factor is out of place, we can't sustain life on this planet anymore. And that may be pointing to a God that created not just this planet, but an entire universe that is set up in a very specific way with a created order that sustains life. And we can throw some things, a few monkey wrenches into the works every now and again to disrupt things. But by and large, the world does what it needs to do to keep spinning and to keep us breathing. And that part of that reality is that for the earth to continue to stay in that balance, sometimes it has to let off a little bit of steam. Sometimes there's things that happen and hurricanes or tornadoes or droughts or volcanic eruptions or earthquakes are simply relative to the earth itself, minor adjustments that have to be made for life to still be able to function on this planet. And we just happen to get in the way sometimes. And that the reality may be more, the presence of God is not felt in the occurrence of an earthquake, but rather the presence of God is felt as we sustain and as we recover after the earthquake. That the presence of God may not be felt in the hurricane as a punishment, but the presence of God is felt as we rally together and as the Spirit of God strengthens people to deal with the fallout of the hurricane. And that's a very different way of thinking than to say, God, I step out of line, so God punishes this entire area with a volcanic eruption because Brent watched a TV show he shouldn't have. And in that sermon a while ago, we kind of shot a lot of holes in it, not just thinking-wise, but scripturally as well. This notion that every little thing is a cosmic whammy from God. Now, as I was perusing this stuff this week and thinking about that same material and saying, well, God might not be found in the cause of the hurricane for a specific reason, but rather that's just part of the natural order, I started to think about this whole notion of, how many of you have heard that God works in mysterious ways? Or the ways of God are not the ways of humanity. How many of you have ever heard that thrown out as kind of a cop-out answer when something bad happens? My aunt just got stricken with cancer and I don't know why it happened. Well, the ways of God are not the ways of man. I don't find that comforting. But a lot of times we see this, and particularly when we look at this idea of predestination as kind of God puppeting things around and selecting who's going to be in and who's going to be out, and creating some people to be saved and some people to be damned. And by the way, John Wesley called that an abhorrent doctrine because it completely does away with the notion of free will and choice. But maybe this idea that God's ways are not our ways,